Hey everyone, it's John Heath here again for Milton Rose Learning with another Let's Learn video on how to ace Jekyll and Hyde. So today what we're doing is we are very much looking at a writing session for anyone who's preparing this brilliant Gothic novella to write. So we're going to look at unpacking exam questions on Jekyll and Hyde and how to do that. It's very crucial that you do that before you start writing. Then we're going to look at assessment objectives and how your teacher marks your work. Very important to know those. And then we'll look at a really good chunk of model writing, really good quality, and then how we hit the assessment objectives with our own writing when we come to actually write on this text. So first off, let's have a little look at unpacking exam questions. Now what tends to happen here is students, they make a mistake because what they do is they dive in. They don't bother reading the question and then they wonder like, oh, how come I only got like a bad grade? So what you want to do is you want to break down any essay question in any subject, by the way. Always break it down conceptually and get a grip on the keywords and the key phrases, and I promise you will do better then. So we've got a question set up for us here. How does Stevenson explore the duality of human nature in the novel? Okay, very deep question that is, very almost philosophical, psychoanalytical, there's a lot going on here. So let's break down the keywords like we would in class. So first off, it's a how question. It's so how does the writer do this? It focuses our minds on techniques. So Stevenson uses dialogue, juxtaposition, he uses Gothic conventions as well to represent the duality of man. He's using a lot of techniques, and the how forces us to focus and identify those techniques. Okay. Then Stevenson himself is in the question. So consider what Robert Louis Stevenson's purpose is. Why the hell did he write Jekyll and Hyde? What's he trying to say? And in my mind, if I'm simplifying, he's writing in response to Victorian anxieties about new science and social decorum. Primarily, he was worried about science taking the place of religion because we were starting to effectively play God and create new kind of knowledge that may have been dangerous. And he was extremely worried about that. And the Victorians had a lot of anxiety around that. Okay, so it's very important to know that. Then another key concept in the question is duality, a word that you're going to bump up against a lot when you're studying this text in school. So Stevenson is exploring the psychological duality of the human mind. So through the characters of Jekyll and Hyde. So the psychoanalytical theory was, if I'm simplifying, was we all have a conscious part of our brain which is deals with like language and logic and ethics and doing the right thing and being a good person, but we all have in the back of our brains almost a subconscious which was more dangerous, had no rules, could lead to things like violence and murder, and we wouldn't even think about it. So that's the duality side of our psychology that psychoanalytical theory was just starting to reveal at this point when this text was written. Then we have, it says human nature, the duality of human nature. Okay, so we have Jekyll looking very suspicious there in his laboratory. So Stevenson explores the conscious element of human nature, as we were just talking about, through Dr. Jekyll, and then the subconscious through the dreadful kind of nature of Edward Hyde. So he's clearly got that duality thing going on, hasn't he? And that's why you've got two characters living in the same body effectively. And that's where the human nature element of this question can be teased out. So you can see just in 2 or 3 minutes there, hopefully we've got a much deeper conceptual grip on that question before we're starting to write. Okay, very, very important. So don't forget to do that in every exam and every essay that you get set, even if it's just for 2 or 3 minutes, just so you don't waste too much time, but make sure that's happening. It's a very important kind of cognitive process before you start writing. Then a lot of students say, well, yeah, John, that's fine, but how is my work going to be marked? And basically, your teacher won't mark your work blind, I promise. They will have a mark scheme, and they'll have what we call assessment objectives. They're basically targets that you need to hit, and they're different on every exam board, but they are broadly similar. There are broad kind of common denominators. And there's, in my mind, we've broke them down into 4. Okay, so with Jekyll and Hyde, they're going to look first off in your essays at your academic expression. So write clearly, write formally, write in posh language if you can, although not too posh, and use subject vocabulary. You're writing an English essay, so we want to see those English terms. We want to see adjectives. We want to see juxtaposition. I want to see symbolism. I want to see Gothic conventions. It should sound like you know what you're talking about, okay? And then use that advanced language to develop your arguments, okay? Number 2, I would say, is detailed analysis. So here I'm looking for you to be zooming in on key quotes, zoom in on key words in the quotes and phrases. Don't just lump a quote in and go, yeah, it shows this. That's much too vague, okay? Always be precise and zoom in. Very important. Explore the writer's methods, so analyse them in detail, the language choices, the word choices, the connotations, the structure. If you're very clever, the structure of the novella is actually quite interesting as well. And then link it to the emotional impact on the reader and try and say, why does the reader react in that way? Don't just say, I don't know, when Hyde tramples all over the girl, the poor girl who gets killed by Hyde. I know that we're shocked by that, but try and say why. So because becomes your magic word there. Say, the reader would react in shock because, and then you'll always get an extra mark. So try and explain why as well. It's very, very important. Then the third way they'll mark your Jekyll and Hyde assignments and exams is by looking at the big ideas and the themes. So don't just kind of tell me what's happening in the novella. I already know because I've read it a million times. It's all about, okay, but what does that show about the themes of duality? For instance, what does it tell me about the authorial intention of Stevenson? What's he trying to actually do? So I think try and go beyond the plot and link it to the big ideas, okay? Very, very important. So for instance, if you're analysing a quote, how does that link to the theme of power, fear, morality, or in today's lesson, the duality of man? Link it to the big ideas and you'll always get better marks. Then the last one is context. Context is all the history and the social stuff that was happening at the time when the novella was written. And use context to deepen your analysis. Don't just throw in a bit of history and say, give me a mark. You won't get a mark. You must link it to the text, okay? So let's look at a little example there. In Victorian society, new psychological theories were being developed, which they were, psychoanalytical theory, including those tracing the sinister desires and impulses locked in the human subconscious as symbolised by Mr. Hyde. So there's a bit of context, there's a bit of psychoanalytical kind of history there, but then it's linked to Mr. Hyde, it's linked back to the book. So make sure you do. It's very important for context. Now for me, those are the 4 ways in which, very broad ways in which your teacher will mark your Jekyll and Hyde work. But that doesn't mean anything if you can't do it yourself. So let's look at a really nice model paragraph and then we'll very quickly look at each assessment objective and how it was hit in this paragraph. Okay, so if you'll indulge me, I'll do my best to read it out. Hyde, as the physical manifestation of Jekyll's repressed desires, is presented using dehumanizing language. He's described as ape-like, troglodytic, and hardly human, drawing on Darwinian imagery to align Hyde with the idea of evolutionary regression. Because Charles Darwin, I'm sure you probably know from biology, was he came up with the theory of evolution, that we came from apes, basically. These lexical choices imply that Hyde represents not only evil, but a return to a more primitive, instinct-driven state. To a Victorian audience deeply anxious about what Darwinism suggested about mankind's origins, this portrayal would be chilling, suggesting that beneath the respectable veneer of civilization lurks something animalistic and uncontrollable. The semantic field of savagery serves to blur the boundary between man and beast, reinforces the theme of hidden brutality within human nature. Bravo, that's top marks for that paragraph. Fantastic writing. But don't just take my word for it. Let's look at how it hits the kind of mark scheme, if we can call it that, the assessment objectives. Academic expression, number one. Well, it's got a clear formal style, drawing on Darwinian imagery, is very, very nice expression. It does use subject-specific terminology as well, lexical choices, semantic field. It's clearly a lit essay, and this student can write very well. Number two, analysis of language and structure. Well, it does zoom in, doesn't it? It focused on ape-like, troglodytic, hardly human. It's zooming in on keywords and phrases, which is always a good thing. Always do that if you can. It does unpack connotations of words, like the hidden associations of words, like primitive, instinct-driven, regression, those kinds of things. And it does show how Stevenson's language blurs human and animal boundaries to reinforce the duality. So it's very much analysing the language on quite a deep level for me. Then number three, the big ideas and themes. Well, it does do that, although a little bit implicitly. It links Hyde to primal instincts and savagery, so the theme of hidden brutality. And it does develop a line of argument. Civilization versus barbarism is extremely fragile in this text. So it's clearly linking to big ideas and themes very, very nicely. Lastly, context. So it links to Darwin's theory of evolution and Victorian fears about degeneration. And it recognises how a Victorian audience would respond and be very deeply anxious, because at the time Charles Darwin was saying, yeah, we're not sure if religion has got it right and God created us all. He argued that, well, no, we descended from apes and we just evolved into humans. That was destabilising the religious narrative of human origin. So the Victorian audience was struggling to deal with that. And that's well kind of pulled out in this kind of model paragraph as well. Okay then, so hopefully you found that useful if you've got a Jekyll and Hyde kind of writing coming up or exams and things like that. Don't forget to hit the like, subscribe and tap the bell icon, of course, to never miss another Let's Learn video again. If you found the video useful or you just want to chat about content and stuff, please do drop us comments. We always reply in the comments box below for the videos. Please do drop us a message if needed. And it just remains to say, hopefully you found that enjoyable and you had a bit of fun along the way. And it just remains to say, as we say, thanks for listening and take care.